Well, the idea is that we're rearranging some of the catalog for the quartet and Busendorfer and voice. And we're trying to pick a wide range of songs so that it's not just from one of the records, it's not just Little Earthquakes, it's the whole catalog, and maybe some songs that you wouldn't think would be a string quartet pick. But this particular string quartet is really quite something because they can use their instruments as a rhythm section. And they're very modern. I mean, they're in their late 20s. I could be their mom. So there is that level of, I've always liked to be experimental with music, and they seem to want to be, even though we're from a different generation. And we thought, okay, so let's pick some songs that maybe everybody wouldn't have thought was obvious.
Yeah.
It's similar in that going back to ancient carols and twisting them a bit, bringing them into the 21st century. Deutsche Gramophone found me out doing what I do on the road, and this German musicologist had this idea that would I consider writing a 21st century song cycle in that form, but based on classical themes. And I mean, I've said this, but quite honestly, I just looked at him and said, let's have a drink, because I need to really think this through. And he said, well, I think you should see it as a challenge. I said, it's a huge challenge, and if you get this wrong, then you can never show your face again. As you know, if you get it wrong, Rolling Stone might be the first, but they might not be the first to tell you that you suck. So why take a risk? I have a pretty good career. Why take that risk? And yet I love to take a risk, even though, you know, I'm a mom and I'm older. I still like to take a challenge on. Well, you have to remember that these great masters were the original rock stars. I mean, if you really study Franz Liszt, I mean, you can't say that there are a lot of guys walking around right now that can pull it off like he pulled it off. And so when you really think about Beethoven and those guys, it was quite radical, and their structures are radical. Sometimes pop music, and I don't mean to hurt your friends' feelings, it can be great, and they're, as you all know, it's what you do. You know, most music that's coming out, there is not an underground, but you know, there are musicians that are challenging the system, but it's very hard to get heard because the radio, for the most part, unless you're one of these eclectic stations, a lot of them are playing stuff that's very derivative, and there's a formula, and unless you work within this commercial formula, then it's hard to get played on the radio. And so those artists are very brave to fight the fight. But if you think of the structures of the masters, I mean, it's shit-kicking stuff, right? Kicks ass. And so structurally, if you want to be a great composer, sometimes you have to break out of the confines of pop music, which are very strict, incredibly strict, if you're in the commercial world. Well, I must say, I had to listen to a lot of classical music in order to do this project. And it's not very glamorous. I wish I could tell you I had vinyl backstage and it was a beautiful thing. It was coming to me sent by this musicologist from Deutsche Gramophone recordings that I could listen to and understand the music. Let's put it this way, if I were only pulling from my classical repertoire, then this album would have been only based on piano pieces I had to learn, you know, for my recitals. And that's not what I wanted to make this record about. I wanted it to be pulled from the most exciting pieces that I could find. And so that was also collaboration with him. But the record collection that we take with us is very different because it's compiled. My husband and I have put all our kind of CDs together, and our daughter has quite a catalog to pull, a few thousand to pull from. Well, no, she never really talked about it. She travels with me, so she was on tour with me when this whole thing was getting built last year, and she said, so what's the story? And we talked about it, and I knew nature had to have a voice. And we talked about nature showing herself through the eyes of a child, but a child changeling, a shape-shifting creature from Irish mythology. And we made her a fox-goose character, the hunter and the hunted. And we thought that sometimes grown-ups don't listen to children very well. And so Annabelle needed to be a sage-like character. And Tash had discovered the blues when she was 9. She said, she has a British accent, so she said, you know, Mummy, when I discovered the blues when I was 9, the earth, it just stopped for me. And I knew that was my pathway, yeah. And I thought, okay. So let's design that around her pathway, which is a little tricky when you're dealing with classical masters, but I was beginning to find kind of jazz roots, fathers of jazz, Chopin. If you really study his voicings and what he was doing, you know, he is a father to that form. Whether he's been recognized as that, I began to discover that when I was building Cactus Practice. I'd love Kelsey, she's my niece, she plays the Fire Muse, and Tash to be on stage, but they're both in school. Oh. So Tash was accepted to the Sylvia Young Performing Arts School in London. Tash has been studying acting since she was 6 or 7 at stage school, and so really pushed us to go to this school in London. Quite a few people have gone there, and it's heavy on the acting, singing, and dancing. And she starts on her birthday, she starts boarding school. And Kelsey is at Cap 21 in New York City studying as well. So no, it's the string quartet and the Busendorfer, and maybe I'll do covers of their songs. Yes, it is harsh sometimes, and relationships can be harsh sometimes. Isn't something that the people that we love the most, even whether it's friends or family or a lover, how it can be brutal, because the things you choose to say, do you say it because you're just fed up with the world and you're exhausted, and instead of saying it to the people you needed to say it to out there, you say it to the safest people? I don't know. These are questions that I was finding as I was building the Tori of the story. And the Tori sitting here is partly the Tori of the story, but you know, when you're writing a narrative, it can't just be about you. That wouldn't be that exciting. Not that exciting. And I also was pulling on years and years of different events that you go through and you feel and you store up for a story like this, where it all has to transpire from dusk till dawn, and yet her whole life is flashing in front of her when he walks out. And yet there are moments of beauty. Danger as well. It's dangerous, I think, ripping your skin off and letting parts of you die. But she has to do that in order to, I think, reclaim a part of herself, which he can't do for her. Only she can do that. For me, I think it's up to the listener to decide what's going to happen, and I think that's very reflective about where the listener is in their life and the relationships that they're in. And let's face it, some relationships need to be over. I've had this conversation with people all over the world who've said to me, yeah, Tori, but you know, some relationships need to be done. And I would say, yeah, okay, but some don't. And that's because I do think that we throw them away. It can be very disposable. You know, call the attorney. Just do it. That's such a, I just see that in the entertainment world. Just get the lawyer on the line. And it's such cop-out because relationships can get really sexy. You know, you get through a little blood, and then the blood turns into wine, and then you know you're into this transformational, alchemical marriage of it doesn't have to be, words don't always have to be violent. Yeah, in this story, I think she's pulling a lot on ancient Irish myth. And, you know, there's something really dead romantic about that. Reading it and studying it and thinking about how some of these lovers would, you know, flee certain situations to be together and sleeping all over Ireland under the dolmens, or however you pronounce it, and these tombs and big huge rocks, and people were chasing them because the woman was supposed to marry this old man but really fell in love with the guy that was working for him. And you know, the things that we do for love, but then once we have it, we do so little to keep it. You know, we don't weed those gardens, do we, people? We don't get in there. Once we see a snake, we say, oh, you have it. I'll just plant another one over here. But no, you have to say to the snake, you here, you go play over there, and I'm gonna nurture this relationship.